Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you joining us just now. Welcome to session 7, the final session of our Advancing Women, Peace, and Security in the Indo-Pacific Conference. Over the next 90 minutes, this session, entitled Gender and Climate Security in the Indo-Pacific, will explore one of the biggest security threats likely to face humanity in both the immediate and long terms. My name is Rob York, and I am Director for Regional Affairs at Pacific Forum. The Pacific Forum is holding this conference in partnership with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Office of Women, Peace, and Security to discuss the important role of WPS across the region. This topic could not be more timely, especially in light of the UN Security General's declaration that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th assessment report is a code red for humanity. In his statement, he noted that the alarm bells are deafening, the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions are putting billions of people at immediate risk, with many of the changes becoming irreversible. Our panelists today will explore the implications of these dire warnings for peace and security and reflect on the importance of the WPS agenda for meeting the challenges that we are certain to confront in the coming decades. Please note that remarks made in today's program are on the record, and a video and audio recording of this session will be made available on the Pacific Forum website and Pacific Forum's and Indo-PACOM's YouTube channels in the future. Today's conference is a public webinar, which means there are individuals joining the event virtually who are not visible to the conference panelists and participants. Participants are welcome to keep their cameras off or on during conference proceedings. We would like to remind our speakers to keep their presentations up to 10 minutes so that we can have ample time for questions and discussions. You may find a detailed agenda of our past sessions in our virtual conference booklet, which can be accessed via the link being sent to the chat box now. The conference booklet also provides detailed biographic information of all panelists and moderators for the past 2 days. For the Q&A, participants are encouraged to raise their hands or submit questions via the chat or Q&A box, and can do so at any time during the talks. Again, those in person can raise a hand or tip their name placard and wait to be called upon. I'll now hand the mic over to your moderator for this event, Ms. Sharon Bhagwan Rolls, Regional Manager for Shifting the Power Coalition and Regional Representative for Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. Ms. Bhagwan Rolls, if you would.
Thank you so much, Rob. Yandra Vinaka, good morning from Suva, Fiji, where I am very pleased to be joining you today for this session, one that is incredibly important for my Pacific Island region, most definitely. And before we get started with the panel, please allow me a few moments to provide my own reflection. As we know, the Pacific Island region is recognized as one of the most vulnerable to the climate change, including slow and intensifying disasters, slow onset and intensifying disasters. Very closely linked to the previous panel discussion as well is the issue of extremely underrepresentation of women in leadership positions, and not just in political places, formal governance, but also in local and traditional governments, which kind of sets the scene in terms of understanding the importance of applying a WPS agenda. And it is no wonder that as we experience the climate crisis as well as COVID-19, as women, we have been advancing a peace, development, and humanitarian nexus approach. As a Pacific Island feminist myself, I see this as a foundation for building peaceful, inclusive, and secure communities together. And it is the approach that we advocate in the context of the Boe Declaration. It was adopted in 2018 by Pacific leaders as a regional commitment that affirms human security, because as leaders have said, climate change is the greatest security threat facing our region. But one of the issues that we could possibly discuss is, while we look at the climate crisis, how do we bring in the WPS perspective, both into climate change adaptation, but also in humanitarian action response. And this is part of the work that I'm pleased to be able to continue to do today. I think it's also important to consider climate security in the context of WPS beyond simply traditional militarized responses. How do we enhance the human security approach when we are dealing with multiple issues affecting communities on a daily basis? This does indeed require multi-stakeholder partnership approaches, local leadership, and flexible funding, from the early warning to the preparedness response and the long-term recovery. Linking back to the previous session as well, it has been disappointing to see that in COVID response and recovery planning, gender equality, women, peace and security are not high on the agenda of many of our leaders. So I'm looking forward to our panel today, bringing their diversity and yet a common connection in terms of the WPS agenda as we address gender and climate security. Our first speaker today is Joan Carling. Joan is the co-convener of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group for Sustainable Development and Executive Director of Indigenous Peoples Rights International. Ms. Carling, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my perspectives on the issues of women and climate change. To start with, women are disproportionately affected by climate change due to already existing discrimination and gender inequality. According to the International Panel on Climate Change, they have found out that gender inequalities are further exaggerated by climate-related hazards, and they result in bigger or larger workloads for women, occupational hazards, indoors and outdoors, psychological and emotional stress, and higher mortality rate for women than men. Further, according to Veronica Collantes, an intergovernmental specialist from the UN Women, gender inequality hampers women's capacity and potential to be actors of climate action. These gender inequalities relates to access to and control over resources, access to education, and to equal rights, and access to decision-making processes define what women and men can do and cannot do in particular contexts in relation to climate change. So this sets the context of why we need gender justice in the context of also addressing climate change. So the question that is posed to us is, what difference will women make if they are part of decision making or leadership? So first is there are two sides of it. One is that it will allow women to share their perspectives, their aspirations, and enhance their knowledge and skills in relation to addressing climate change. In other words, it is making climate action more gender sensitive towards addressing gender inequality and for ensuring indigenous or women's empowerment. So if we talk about allowing women to contribute their skills and knowledge, I want to, for example, stress that women are also actors and they are not just vulnerable or victims. Women, and I want to cite indigenous women and rural women, are actually knowledge holders. They have a lot of knowledge that pertains to community resilience in the face of climate change. And women are in the front line in addressing the impacts of climate change on the ground, and thereby are very knowledgeable on specific adaptation measures. So another area where they can make a difference is on the issue of sustainable food systems, and food security, because women, especially rural women, are the ones closest to nature and in terms of food production. And again, their knowledge are very critical as we face a food crisis as one of the impacts of climate change. We also know that women are the ones that have the rich knowledge in relation to biodiversity protection, as well as sustainable resource management. We know that women who are practicing traditional occupations like rotational agriculture, for example, have very rich knowledge and practices in terms of enhancing biodiversity as part of forest management, and at the same time providing food and herbal medicines for their communities. So it also addresses the issue of health for communities. The other one is in relation to better distribution and management of energy supplies. And this is a critical issue for women in rural areas who have their workload is heavier because of lack of access to energy or electricity. For example, one that is discussed a lot is the issue of cooking and other domestic work where without electricity, the workload for women is heavier. So if we have women participating in decision making, it can lead to better distribution and management of energy supplies, because their needs will be accounted in this kind of decisions. The other one is also access to technologies that are appropriate for women, because this will also ensure that they benefit from the use of technology, not only in addressing climate change, but also in addressing gender equality. Now, I also want to mention that the continuing challenges now is really still the lack of spaces and mechanisms for the effective and meaningful participation and leadership of women in relation to climate change. We have, for example, in international bodies, like looking at, just to give an example, the board of the Green Climate Fund, which the Green Climate Fund actually has a policy that every project should include gender or address specific women's issues on climate change. But if you look at the composition of the Green Climate Fund board, there's only 5 out of 24, and the two co-chairs are both men. So it shows that even these bodies that are saying that they support gender are not walking the talk, so to speak. So we need to address this lack or disproportionate representation of women in decision making, where it really matters in terms of access of finance, in terms of access to resources, because unless women are provided access to resources, there will be no gender equality, and there will be the issue of climate injustice is going to persist. And their participation in decision making will thereby provide that avenue for them to take decisions in terms of policies that will uphold the rights of women, and that will address in gender inequality in climate actions. So I want to end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. And indeed, the alarm bells are ringing not only on in terms of what the IPCC report is saying on what is happening to climate change, but if we want to shift the climate crisis to climate security and climate justice in the context of women's rights, participation, and the Women, Peace and Security agenda, the alarm bells are certainly ringing on underrepresentation of women in processes, despite, of course, the adoption of UNSCR 2242 in 2015 that brings climate change and climate security into the UN Security Council. So it's going to be interesting to see how can we actually make that shift in terms of power and decision making. Our next speaker is Dr. Laura Hossman. Laura is Associate Professor at Arizona State University, as well as the founder and director of Solar Spell, which she will speak about in detail. Dr. Hossman, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will go ahead and start my slides. And I'm going to start out with a story that was shared with me from Yap, one of the 4 federated states of Micronesia. And it was shared with me by Olivia, a Peace Corps volunteer who was living in Yap with a host family. But here she is at a training that I led with Peace Corps volunteers in Micronesia on the offline solar powered digital library called Solar Spell that's on the table in front of her. And Olivia then brought the library with her to Yap. And it might seem pretty amazing to be able to live on a tropical island that looks like this, surrounded by such breathtaking beauty. But please remember that this is really an isolated locale. So for example, there's no internet here. So Olivia's host mother had been watching videos offline that were on the offline Solar Spell digital library, and she came across one that hit a little too close to home. So she watched it again, and then she came to Olivia and told her about this video that she wanted to watch together with both Olivia and her daughter. The video was about sexual assault, and it showed Pacific Islander women talking about this issue, not accepting it, saying that it's wrong, coming together as a community and confronting both the attacker and the issue and making a change in their community, which wasn't easy. The video isn't easy to watch. Well, in Olivia's host family, the daughter had been sexually assaulted, but it was considered taboo to even talk about it on this remote Pacific island. But the mother knew that it was wrong. So after watching a video with other Pacific Islander women not accepting this and doing something about it, they saw themselves and they knew that they could do something. So the 3 of them organized a movie watching night and invited all of the women in their community to come. This was the video they showed. And afterward, there wasn't a dry eye in the room because it turned out that this was a problem that affected nearly every family on this island. But since it had been taboo, no one talked about it. But now they had seen what could be done, they knew what they could do, and the floodgates were open. According to Olivia, big changes came about on this island after that movie night. I share that story because for me, that shows the impact of empowerment that having access to curated, localized, relevant information can have. So how do you get such life-changing information about women's empowerment, life-saving information about climate change to truly remote rural locations? Many people believe that the internet is the solution to providing access to quality, relevant information, but I'm here to say that it isn't, and it isn't happening fast enough, and it isn't even the right way to go, because half the world still lacks internet access, and we know those numbers are significantly higher across the Pacific. The gender gap is also very real, and the infrastructure needed to change these statistics is decades away from being built. By the way, the UN defines you as connected if you've connected once in the last 3 months. And what does your internet use look like if you're in a low-income country? Well, if you have it, it's by the byte, it's on your phone, it's expensive. There's no such thing as unlimited. And so since you're rationing it, you're not surfing to educational sites that you don't know exist. And while the internet is undoubtedly a tool that has changed the world, we're all on it right now at this conference. It was not designed explicitly to solve development challenges or to empower women or communities or make people more secure. In fact, if you're coming online for the first time somewhere in the world right now, chances are nearly 100% that this is what you're experiencing: social media or Facebook. And actually, it would be on your phone. For the past 5 years, I've been carrying out interviews related to my work all over the world, and I ask a question: if there's any internet at all in your village or community, what is it mainly used for? 100% of the people I've surveyed have responded Facebook around the world for the past 5 years. And if they keep talking, then they start to tell me about the problem of fake news in their community, and they don't have any idea what to do about it. That's not even to mention cyberbullying and other disempowering activities that so often take place over social media, particularly with those who have the least experience with it. So I and other researchers globally are finding that people with limited connectivity are just not progressing beyond social media. They don't know about all of the good things, the empowering things that can be found on the internet. And for the majority of people around the world, thus, Facebook or social media is the internet. And while we on this call know that there can be serious negative outcomes from getting all of one's external information from the for-profit, emotion-driven echo chamber that is social media, well, how do we combat this? I believe that what's really missing, what the real problem is that people who haven't used the internet largely have also not had access to high-quality libraries. There's an entire ecosystem missing, but if we focus on information literacy for a moment, what's missing are the skills to navigate, identify, evaluate, effectively use, and ultimately create information. Those are the skills that one needs to make empowering use of the internet. And these skills don't just magically appear from being connected. But I believe that we can make a space, a reality, where offline is better than online, especially for educational settings and for first-time technology users, even as they learn internet-ready skills. A space that's welcoming, safe, no cyberbullying, no viruses, no age-inappropriate content. A place that's both localized and relevant. People can really see themselves in this space, filled with only educational, inspirational, confidence-building, skill-building information. If you haven't guessed yet, I call this space a library. And I believe that a library is a place where users can truly build the skills that they need to make empowered use of the internet, even offline. But if we're going to get this information out to places that are infrastructurally challenged and not yet connected, then we need innovative technology. And we have that here, but honestly, the technology is always the easy part. It's changing mindsets and skill sets that is the bigger challenge. And when people around the world lack access to libraries, well, you know what? We can change that. Libraries can be where the most important, empowering, confidence-building ICT skills are built. So what is Solar Spell that you've heard about so far? Solar Spell is a global educational initiative at Arizona State University that takes a holistic approach to empowering learners in low resource locations. Our approach starts with locally relevant curated libraries, offline solar-powered easy-to-use technology, local capacity building through partnerships, and a train-the-trainer approach, and then carrying out impact evaluation actively to drive ongoing improvements of every aspect of the initiative. And as you can see by the arrows here, this is an ongoing process of continual improvement. We believe that a holistic approach is needed to build these human capacity skills because without information literacy, the internet simply won't be a force for empowerment. Quite the opposite. Student success is central to both Solar Spell globally and at Arizona State University. Our secret sauce actually is engaging about 100 university students every year on aspect of this initiative. So believing that libraries are public goods and access to education and information is a human right. We've located ourselves at a university, but not just any university. It's a public university that defines itself by whom it includes and how they succeed. So very quickly, how does it work? There is a solar panel that provides power to a battery inside, or you're seeing a battery in the corner of the slide. It provides power to a localized, to a micro server that is serving up an offline localized Wi-Fi hotspot that any Wi-Fi capable device, tablet, smartphone, laptop, can connect to and freely surf all of the thousands of educational items that are on the library. The library's resources are pre-curated onto an SD memory card, and yet it looks and feels like being online, so users can search, explore, and learn in a safe offline digital library setting. If you were in the same room with me, I would say, please take out your smartphone, look for and connect to the Wi-Fi signal called SPELL, open your favorite web browser, type in 10.10.10.10 and start exploring. This is what the easy to navigate website looks like that opens. There's no passwords, everything's open access, downloadable, shareable, and pre-curated, prioritizing our users' educational needs and content requests. And so what kind of things do you see on the library? Videos and PDF files of all kinds of educational information, but also prioritizing a few cross-cutting themes, including building information literacy and internet-ready skills, sustainability and climate change related resources, gender equality and empowering content, and content that addresses both gender equality and sustainability at the same time, again, localized. So as excited as I am to see many gender-related advancements that has taken place, I still want to argue for the places that are offline and don't have access to information yet. But this need not remain the case. We have everywhere there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. And so with a significant footprint and presence in and commitment to the Pacific, we can take an offline approach to building information literacy and internet-ready skills across the Pacific and beyond, because we're already doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your presentation and for highlighting also the vital importance of not just producing content that is gender inclusive, that promotes women's empowerment and explains it to communities, but also tackling the gender dynamics and the realities of information communication technology. What is accessible, what is appropriate, and how can we also empower communities through technology, making it, you know, just there at your doorstep or in your homes and community to progress our collective agenda. Thank you indeed, Laura. I'd now like to introduce Ms. Selena Agaton. Ms. Agaton is the founder and managing director of MapPH, an organization working in the Philippines and Indonesia. Selena is actually joining us initially with a video presentation, but then she will be available for our Q&A session. So let's have the video from Selena. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Selena Agaton, and I'm the founder and managing director of MapPH. I'll be covering 3 themes today. First being the broken model of outsider and expat revolving door staff that exclude women and effectively institutionalize corruption and further endanger already vulnerable communities. How these multiple scattered projects create more chaos to traumatize communities, and even worse now during the pandemic. Second, that easy-to-learn, free and open-source geospatial tools help provide life-saving local employment and also the opportunity to create more accurate data collection with more efficiency, with lower costs and safety precautions, including climate change and disaster risk modeling. And lastly, that in Asia Pacific, many economies, majority of micro, small, and medium enterprise are led by women. And effective pandemic and climate crisis strategies cannot exist without reflecting the central role of women in the economic, social, and climate prosperity of their communities. Part of my work came from a gender gap mapping study funded by World Bank and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where I led a team of 200 local staff across 6 provinces and conflict areas in the Philippines. we found that while women are at the center of economic and social tasks in their communities, they mostly traveled by foot on unpaved roads for longer distances, more frequently, and when they traveled on transport, it was more expensive compared to men. They also had the least access to infrastructure, training, and finance, yet they had more multiple paying jobs compared to men, and did the lion's share of healthcare tasks, taking the kids to school, and most everything else for the community. So the program I'm sharing with you today addresses these fundamental issues. Open Knowledge Kit is a regeneration program, and the goal is to be able to strengthen local knowledge, create local jobs, and strengthen local stewardship as well. It's a free and open source toolkit and employment regeneration program to empower local women with digital employment and the stewardship of the economic, climate, and social prosperity of their communities. We've built these 3 tools that are meant to be low cost, easy to use as well, and very quick to train. So these 3 tools can be trained in 20 minutes up to 2 days. And in comparing the cost of our hardware versus big tech that usually ends up owning the data and charging access fees for that data, you can see that our costs are much lower than the industry standards. And in terms of software, all our software is free and open source. So that's not a prohibitive cost to many vulnerable communities. The first tool is Open Data Kit. It's a free and open source survey and data collection tool that can be taught in an hour and set up on any smartphone, and it works without internet. And learning this tool then provides the foundational skills to collect all kinds of data, photos, videos, interviews, other mapping data that can be gainful employment. So this is how it works. During the pandemic, and actually for 10 years, we've been training people remotely. And so during the pandemic, I've been training Indigenous women across the Philippines. This is Diohana. She's actually from Maguindanao conflict region. And using Facebook Messenger, because it's the only reliable form of communication, I trained her in 20 minutes on how to take 360-degree angle photos using 3 different angles. And this is what it looks like. So essentially, she's taking photos in a circle, and she moves down a path to collect other imagery. And the next slide I'll show you is the finished product, where our software pieced together the different photos that she took using her $150 camera and created a 3D reconstruction. So you can see that the resolution is incredible, and this was using a $150 smartphone. And that way, someone can actually navigate a community as if they were there. Now, this is different from a panoramic photo, because that would be distorted, like the fisheye distortion that you see. This is an actual digital twin. So this is data that you're looking at with photogrammetry. So someone could walk along this path and tag the features that they see here, do road construction quality assessments, assessments of environmental different species that you see here, the quality of infrastructure, even the mobility and transportation times. And the data in this photo can then be imported directly into a map because it contains the coordinates. So the next step up, if you need to take videos of higher volume, is 360 Libre. So it's Raspberry Pi camera stitched together, and you can learn this in 2 days. Next is Open Drone Map. This is really our core technology, where you can use a drone and mount our hardware on any kind of drone and achieve 95% accuracy of the industry standard of LiDAR, which is used in climate change and disaster risk modeling. This takes 2 days to train as well. We also train in 2 days as well OpenStreetMap, which is a free and open source mapping platform used by 7 million global users. And during these workshops, you can learn different tasks that take 1 minute, 30 minutes, up to 3 days of remote mapping task tutorials. So this is built for pandemic conditions where it's not safe to field map. And then in that same 2 to 3 day workshop, we teach QGIS, which provides the rich analytics, big data analytics, being able to analyze data layers together within the same workshop. And this workshop, we've actually taught from 6 years old up to 60 plus how to use OpenStreetMap. And so the only requirement I have with the workshops is that it's someone who has the interest and capacity to learn and has good local knowledge. Technical ability is not a requirement. And so we really prioritize someone having knowledge and an interest to learn. So, and women actually really excel in mapping because, for one, they're very passionate about being able to share the needs of their communities, and it also requires detailed work and a knowledge of the local community. And so we have an almost all female training team, and also in terms of the training workshops that we do, we find it more effective when we actually separate men and women during the mapping exercises. So there's 3 opportunities that I wanted to share with you today that are immediate opportunities to provide life-saving employment. So Open Knowledge Kit can be deployed to collect data collection for the pandemic relief and recovery efforts and the critical gender data that's missing in so many infrastructure and investment plans. Next, we're part of this initiative. It's the Irap International Road Assessment Program. We've completed several studies with this now. And this is a highly technical, per 100 meter technical analyses of road safety. So it requires data collection every 100 meters. So again, providing opportunities for local employment. And then there's the analysis portion of that to be able to address road safety issues. And so the study that we've just completed right now, actually, during the pandemic, we've created a completely remotely trained, low-tech, low-cost version of data collection and traffic volume and speed surveys, where typically an outsider or expat team would be flown in or bussed into a community with speed guns and other expensive equipment to take these surveys. So we've developed a methodology actually using just colored soda bottles. We were using Coca-Cola bottles actually in this instant. If they didn't have soda bottles, then we used plastic chairs, and they just needed a measuring tape, a smartphone, and a tripod. And for this exercise, keeping in mind that in the Philippines, minimum wage is $6 a day, we were able to pay folks to shoot, to take a 1-hour video and with the setup, and paid them 50 to 100 US dollars for the 1 hour of footage, plus transportation money, plus 1 month of medical, travel, and liability insurance. And lastly, we've been, seeing the escalation in the crisis in Indigenous and community conserved areas, and Open Knowledge Kit can provide such tremendous benefits to be able to fast track so many of the delays, decades-long delays, and the politicization of climate change and the prohibitive costs of completing climate change and disaster risk mapping. So our methodology really helps fast track all of that. And not only does it help accelerate the technology, but it also places the community and the women at the very center of data and knowledge stewardship in that community. So those are the three major opportunities, and thank you for listening to my talk today.
Thank you very much, Selena. And once again, for making those linkages, not only with the availability of inclusive technology, but also factoring in something that's quite important when we think about women in communities being engaged in response and to support participation, building evidence, but also ensuring resources are provided. So we're not adding the burden of unpaid work already that women bear in our communities, particularly in this time of COVID, but also in the context of climate crisis. It is important to recognize, uplift, and support women's local knowledge, as we've heard, and also to ensure that resources also reach women in order to be engaged. Our final speaker on the panel comes to us actually a little bit closer from Fiji right now. So I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Maria Tanyang, who is actually a lecturer and at the Australian National University. And she is also a WPS fellow at Pacific Forum. Dr. Tanyang, Maria, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you all. It's a great pleasure to be joining you. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Canberra, land traditionally owned and cared for by the Ngunnawal peoples, and I pay my respect and gratitude to them for being cared for in a land that they've traditionally helped grow and nourish. My presentation today, I think, builds on a lot of contributes to the ongoing discussions that we're having in terms of the role of women in signaling the alarm bells for all sorts of integrated risks and insecurities from a very holistic perspective. So my talk builds on evidence, primary and secondary data that I've generated doing research in Philippines, Cambodia, and Vanuatu. Many of these insights I produced in academic publications, but also most recently as part of the inaugural Gender, Climate, and Security report published by several UN organizations. And it's the first to really start actively looking at the intersections of gender, climate, and security. The three main points that I'd like to make as part of this presentation is to really emphasize first that Asia and the Pacific region is a crucial site if we're interested in examining where multiple and intersecting crises are occurring, from conflicts, COVID-19 to climate change. It is indispensable that we start in this region, and I'll talk a bit about examples of why that is the case. Second, as we've mentioned already, when we're talking about the signaling of alarms, women, especially from the region, as activists, as scholars, as policymakers and leaders, have been actively pointing out where those starting points are for comprehensive risk mapping and response. And this is, again, drawing on from their lived experiences where conflicts, disasters are not just separate events, but have always been intersecting, albeit occurring with greater ferocity and frequency in the last few years. And then finally, this is where we're, as part of this research, I found, as other speakers have pointed out, what we need to really ensure is to move away from what I term gender-light approaches. And these are approaches where women are included, but without the weight of redistributing resources and power in society. Right. So multiple crises in the Asia-Pacific. As I've mentioned, if you look at the history of the Asia-Pacific, the region has historically been exposed to multiple and overlapping insecurities. And indeed, a good example of this is the ideas that have emerged from the region. Again, whether you're looking at activist work, policymakers, leaders, and activists, they've conceptualized security within the nexus of capitalism, colonialism, and militarism. So already there was a clear distinction distinction between how women from the Asia and the Pacific conceptualize gender inequality and oppression. It wasn't just primarily gender as the category of oppression, but also because they were non-white women, women that have suffered colonialism and with their labor within a global economy considered as cheapened. In the context of this, we're also looking at a region with the most, with the high plurality of political, economic, and sociocultural systems. This means it's very important then to think about how varying outcomes on gender equality issues in turn shapes differential vulnerabilities to climate risks and varying capacities for prevention and response among countries and within affected populations. So when we're thinking about governance challenges, this is one of your hard cases, right? How do you ensure no one gets left behind within a very diverse region? And perhaps worryingly, it is also the region where countries are exhibiting negative trends on sustainable development goals. When we think about how we are moving forward into really ensuring sustainable development, countries in the Asia Pacific are not just lagging, they are moving back moving further away from achieving these goals, especially in areas of climate action, natural resource management, and environmental protection. And so when we want to really look at where do we start and how do we ensure that we are inclusive and really holistic in our approaches, we cannot ignore the Asia Pacific region. And when we think about, okay, how do we start? We know that Asia and the Pacific is the most diverse. It is also the most at risk of climate hazards. We need to start looking at those alarm bells, right? Where do we and who do we listen to when we're thinking about those alarm bells? Globally, as the IPCC report pointed out, we need to have integrated risk assessment management and long-term responses that are increasingly attuned to simultaneous hazards, cumulative impacts, and cascading disasters, which cannot be left to the analysis of natural and physical sciences alone. So this means we need social sciences, we need arts and humanities, but also we need to really take seriously what are the range of knowledge base and perspectives and expertise that we need to bring together to really get at those integrated risk assessments that increasingly climate governance and survival of the planet basically requires. There is established research already that shows that countries working towards gender equality are more likely to achieve climate justice. And therefore, we cannot have integrated risk assessments without, as other scholars and panelists, our co-panelists have mentioned out, ensuring that our knowledge base, our range of expertise are gender equal. And then finally, there is also growing evidence to show that the localized and everyday knowledge, especially among women, contain insights for identifying the conditions for security comprehensively. And this is especially in terms of early warning signs. In my own research as well, we know of early warning signs that are deeply rooted in people's everyday lives. In some places that have always experienced conflicts and disasters, they predict or understand when conflicts occur based on changes in household and community level gendered relationships. So for example, in Bangladesh, there's existing research that they tend to observe an increase in child marriage when drought or when there's severe disasters, whether it's drought, flooding, because that has carryover impacts on their economic security. And therefore, with pre-existing gender inequalities, for them, they understand that when girls are being married off at younger and younger age, this is an early warning sign and also an outcome of droughts and disasters and survival for these communities. And there are many of these stories that are already being recognized as real early warning signs that need to be taken into account. But that also leads us to the importance of, again, those sounding the alarm, because women have been signaling the alarm. And in fact, a most clear example of this is the emergence of the concept of the shadow pandemic. In the aftermath, and I'm sure the previous panel discussed this strongly, is that it was women's groups, and including women in the Asia Pacific, that signaled that when you're only looking at the crises in one way, you're ignoring all these other interrelated crises that are emerging or inherent to the crisis response. So this is another, again, example of what we are seeing. So the last part of this presentation is to really say, if women's voices and perspectives contain those early warning signs and that they can signal the alarm and have been signaling alarm, why are we not seeing a more robust engagement with holistic approaches? And I argue this is because there are key ways in which those voices are, rather than being listened to as alarm bells, they are being reduced to background noise through gender light approaches. And gender light approaches are most prevalent when we start seeing that gender is done to depoliticize gender issues, meaning it doesn't talk about ongoing and interconnected themes or issues of political violence, of ongoing land reclamation and displacement, and also ongoing militarization of crises. And then finally, it's also when we, again, as we've mentioned, without the weight of redistribution resources and power in society. Often, these gender light approaches come to us when we're not ourselves being reflexive. And in the research that I've done across the several countries, attendance often in these very granular spaces is reduced to a very nominal participation. So women are just being asked to attend, but their contributions do not really drastically shape the outcomes of the agenda. Often women are siloed into women-only spaces where they're expected to only say things that are about women's lives, when in fact women are knowledge holders and they have expertise that are often ignored or devalued or often siloed, because in these spaces through gender seminars and so on, they're only expected to speak on gender-based violence, and these are all important issues, but the expertise and knowledge base isn't just that. And then finally, when gender analysis is incidental and not integral, gender analysis is often added on but not asked to really reconceptualize the very ways in which we understand the problem, who is deemed as an expert, and the range of courses of action that are seen as appropriate. And this again ties in with some of the themes that we're learning in terms of how do we value the expertise of women? Are we looking at it in just a one-dimensional way? Are we looking at women's knowledge in a homogeneous way? Or also, are we really looking at bridging and brokering those different knowledge and expertise that are inherent and also can be cultivated in these regions? And I think I'll end there and really encourage us to be more critical about how we conceptualize and approach this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your presentation and drawing from from your research and your case studies. It is critical that, as we look across the Indo-Pacific region, to identify not only the common challenges, but as you've been identifying, the women-led responses to shifting the power, not just in terms of homogenizing, as you said, that we must only be placed in position or in situations where we're just discussing what are women's issues, but shifting the power and holding all stakeholders accountable that all issues are women's issues, all rights are women's rights. And when we're going to talk about, as we talk about bringing about or realizing climate security, that women must be leading in the response and bringing our definitions of security into those many conversations we've already heard today in our conversation, that this is not just about political processes, but also very key daily lived realities. We're talking about food security, health security. We're talking about addressing the infrastructure, not just around information communication, but also information communication, because this is also how women can also access information in our daily lives. thank you to all of you for setting the scene for this very important topic. We're heading into questions and comments from audience members, so please continue to add your comments to the chat. Thank you to those who have already. We have about 37 minutes, I will say, or maybe 30 minutes before we wrap up at 5 minutes to the top of the hour. If you do have any questions, I am able to keep track of that, or also put your questions in the chat box. And we will go now to Hannah Cole. Hannah, I believe, has a question from the audience joining us today. Over to you, Hannah.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Virtual participants
Yes,
too?
we can.
Hi, I'll face the camera. So I'm so thankful for your presentations, and I was really encouraged by the revolutionary amount of technology that you guys are using. And so I was really wondering, Dr. Hausman mentioned how so many different countries are utilizing Facebook, and that's their primary use of the internet at this point. And Ms. Agaton even mentioned how Facebook Messenger was the only reliable form of communication with some of these populations. So I'd be really interested to hear how, rather than being a hindrance, how Facebook and social media could be a benefit for you guys to use in communication and connection of these communities. And so what's being done? Do you know if Facebook is doing anything? And what could we do in the future as well? Thank you so much for your time and for your presentations.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So maybe Laura, and if Selena, you're on the call, please, can we hear from you? And then I'll also invite Maria and also Joan to share their comments. So Laura?
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that question. I do know very well from seeing firsthand the power that Facebook has had in communities around the world. And I'll also be the first to say that it is a lifeline for so many reasons, for so many people. It is important to be able to know that your uncle just got married, your nephew just had a baby, to be able to communicate, to be able to send money, for example. So it's also quite amazing that it was a private for-profit company that is spurring this level of connectivity and has been able to suppress profits in one location in order to be able to, carry this out. Amazing foresight of a company. There are two sides to every new technology. No technology is an unalloyed good, and no technology is an unalloyed bad. So being able to know the difference takes education. It's quite, I would say it's that stark. And so doing a better job of educating about how the internet works and how social media works, and the fact that every single click that you make is gathering data about you, and that is how the company works. I think a lot of us are now aware of that, but it takes education. And it also, I think that there's advocacy that needs to happen from all of us in the room, recognizing this and making a case to Facebook and beyond. But I would also add, interestingly, that Facebook has supported tools that can allow for learning information literacy, digital literacy. So believe it or not, we have those tools on the Solar Spell offline digital library. So I think it is on us to try to promote the good side of things. So I will stop there and happily hand it to Selena.
Thanks for your question, Anna. We already know that Facebook hasn't been doing enough to suppress fake news, which is such a huge issue in so many countries right now. There is another opportunity with Elon Musk and Starlink and providing internet access globally, actually. It's already being rolled out this year in several countries, and then more widely, it'll be available in Asia-Pacific, I believe by Q1 of next year. And so that's an option we're interested in exploring because it's unlimited data at $99 a month, plus a satellite dish of about $400. So on the one aspect, we're excited to be able to have an alternative, and because most people think that the internet is that Facebook is the internet, but also in the Philippines, we're the #1 online child exploitation, and all the different exploitations that take place with internet access is a real risk. And so specifically in the work that we're doing in Indonesia, because this is still rolling out here, that being aware of the risks and also the mental health issues associated with using the internet and using Facebook are really key, and especially during the pandemic, where the increase in exploitation of women is only going to worsen. So right now, I mean, we have no other choice. I have no choice but to be on Facebook, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to contact remote communities, and mayors send me friend requests. So it's just the reality, and until we have a suitable alternative.
Thanks, Selena, and welcome. Thank you for your video presentation. Joan, maybe if I could ask you, in terms of, as we're talking about information communication technology, what would you say are some of the best practices for consulting women and Indigenous groups in climate-related disasters and recovery efforts? What are you seeing as the way to bring, as you said, the Indigenous and traditional knowledge into the mainstream, if you want, of decision making? And after Joan responds, we're going to take a question from Mark Maniton, also in the audience. So Joan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think what is increasingly also being used by women is information technology, and more we see that it's now becoming more accessible to a number of remote areas, although it's still I mean there's still a huge gap in terms of access. But nevertheless, we've seen the use of information technology in terms of early warning, like people using it to communicate that there's a disaster. So it facilitates also disaster response. And also in relation to access to other forms of support, including, for example, mobilizing support for women that are subjected to violence. So it's like an early warning. At the same time, it's becoming a platform for sharing information across. So what are the for example, in relation to biodiversity conservation, so they can already store using information technology to store what they have in their environment in terms of resources that can be used for medicines, that can be that are at risk or getting endangered. So then they can take action on how to prevent the loss of such biodiversity. So it enhances as a form of gathering information, but also securing the taking action. I mean, mobilizing action to respond to those kind of threats or conditions. So that is one that is now emerging. Though I must say that Indigenous women and rural women are still way behind in terms of access. So we really need to address that. And I also support the others in terms of that information technology is double-edged. So we also don't want misinformation to come and destroy or weaken the knowledge of women.
Thank you so much, Joan. And just to say, one of the actions that we are supporting as the Shifting the Power Coalition here in the Pacific is with our sister organizations in Vanuatu called Women, Wet and Weather. So it is actually also demystifying information communication technology with local Indigenous women, particularly for the Pacific Islands, like with a number of the Southeast Asian communities. We're not just landlocked. We have to navigate around our island communities as well. And we're recently supporting women and young women in Papua New Guinea, both in the capital and in Bougainville, to set up what we're referring to as Marigat information hubs, where they will be able to learn and use technology initially in response to COVID-19. We have two questions actually now from the audience. So if I could ask Mark Maniton to please share his question, followed by Amanda Ellis. Please indicate if there's anyone specifically on the panel. Otherwise, we will then come back to the panel for their responses. Thank you, Mark and Amanda.
Thanks, Sharon, and also to all the great panelists sharing their insights and perspectives for this final session. I think for the past couple of days, we have heard terms like show up, start the conversation, engage, streamline women, peace, and security. But up until this last session, I've sort of gone into the root cause of why do we need to address the gaps in terms of the women, peace, and security. And this question is particularly directed to Dr. Maria Tanyang, a colleague here at Pacific Forum, where she unpacked that, yes, we can show up, we can engage, we can start the conversation, but she clearly laid out that the source of insecurity, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, is rooted from the nexus of capitalism, colonialism, and militaristic approach. And keeping in line with the theme and design of this two-day workshop, I would like to ask Dr. Tanyang, given that sensitivity of developing in third countries on post-colonialism and also militaristic approach, and we have this rising and emerging interest among security forces, particularly from the perspective of the US and its allies, how can we bridge that gap? How can we, what tangible initiatives do you think that could really address that or create a collaborative or enabling environment for security forces to work with these communities or these stakeholders in the region where their source of insecurity is rooted from that nexus of colonialism, capitalism, and militaristic approach? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. As Amanda thinks that through, can we take Amanda's question, please, Amanda?
Great. So thank you all for excellent presentations this morning. I lead global partnerships at the ASU Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. So especially interested in the power of partnerships to have a positive multiplier effect on disseminating good practices. And we heard a lot of good practices today. So I have a couple of questions. One is about youth mappers and where she maps and the global dimension of that, how it's being ramped up across the Pacific. And so wonderful to hear more about that. The other one for Dr. Hossman with regards to the global partnership with the Peace Corps and how that is helping expand the solar spell across the region. And also to think about increasing content. I know Indo-PACOM is particularly interested in humanitarian risk and disaster response. Has there been any thought given to including that kind of material on solar spell so that young women particularly, but all those in communities who are using the solar spell materials can also be upskilled on that critical dimension of the climate crisis in the region? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So maybe if I could ask Maria for your first response, and then we can go to the more targeted, the question from Amanda from the other panelists, Laura in particular. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that question. That's a very difficult one, I must say, but it's absolutely a conversation that we must all have in this space. And so I'll say a few share a few of my thoughts on this, but I would love to hear from other panelists as well as perhaps from other participants. I think really going into the ideas and activism that emerge from the region, it actually helps us really understand globally that what is driving the climate crisis now is not just an occurrence that has happened in the last 50 years or what people call the Anthropocene. And this is not just something that is, a product of the economy, but also about very deliberate national security, foreign policy approaches that have been developed over extended period of time. And there's a continuation between what has happened in these parts of the world through colonialism and imperialism, and how that is shaping how we understand and navigate women, peace and security and climate change now. So we need to acknowledge that. And what that means then, if we really embrace, if we're talking about Asia and the Pacific, embrace and recognize those radical ideas that emerge from this region, we need then to be more critical and reflexive about how we position the kind of solutions we think are part of women, peace and security. And that does not mean that we create good guys and bad guys among us, right? Or rather, on the opposite, it asks us to all work together and to really pull in and harness the different expertise, the different knowledge base, the different range of solutions that different bodies and agencies naturally have, and to broker that and to really acknowledge the pluralism that is very much needed for understanding survival and actually not just survival, but abundance and flourishing in the context of climate change. At the moment, I think what we're seeing here, even in the context of the pandemic, is the idea that we just need to survive, right? We need to survive. And that's been a trope that has emerged in the climate change literature, we need to survive. But actually, there might be other ways forward, right? And if we listen to different perspectives, then we kind of diffuse or decentralize the importance of militarizing any crises, and not just climate change, but the pandemic. We then think of other solutions and think of the expertise of indigenous peoples, for example, as Joan mentioned. And so I think what that really means is a lot of work more ahead for us, and to really ensure that we're not just relying on one expertise, one set of actors to get us out of a crisis. Thanks.
Laura, can we move to you now in response to Amanda's question?
Absolutely. And thank you, Amanda, for that question. So I will take it in two parts. Amanda very kindly allowed me to talk about a partnership that I'm really excited about, which is a global strategic partnership between ASU Solar Spell and the Peace Corps, in order to bring Solar Spell libraries into the remote rural communities around the world where Peace Corps volunteers are serving, and they serve as a conduit, a bridge is what I like to think about, because they have tech skills and are, by definition, American citizens who are volunteering their time for 2 years and live in remote rural communities, and can take for granted a whole raft of technology skills and agency and empowerment that they are helping build that set of skills in the communities where they serve. Having said that, and as excited as I am about this opportunity, it's incomplete because it would never reach all of the places around the world that I would like to get, all of the unconnected locations, all of the countries. So we've also been working with the UN High Commission for Refugees and planning to pilot Solar Spell in refugee camps starting in Ethiopia later this year, as well as with ministries of education. And I'm truly excited to share that we held a train the trainer training with the Marshall Islands Kwajalein School District 2 weeks ago on Solar Spell. So expanded to the Marshall Islands as of 2 weeks ago. So it takes a village, it takes a partnership, it takes all of the above. And in fact, one of my mottos is a library is never finished. So to the next question and point about loading the appropriate content, the right content, and in this case, climate change related humanitarian disaster relief information. We do already have some of that content in the library, but a library is never finished. So we're always looking for more, better, updated information to add, and always working with partners to add it. So yes, there is a recognized need for that, and we are absolutely adding localized climate change and adaptation and sustainability and resilience and all of those good words, but really they're meant, and they are localized and linked to lesson plans, for example, if the libraries are going to schools. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Selena, would you like to add to this conversation?
Hey, Lex. Hi, Ainsley.
Okay, so I'm mindful of time, so maybe Selena can. Oh, okay, you there, Selena?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning of my talk, I think it got cut off there, is that the reality is the current donor system, international donor system, is really built on these revolving door cycles of staff entering vulnerable communities, short-term grant projects. I'm shocked to see on the field how, 2 workshops is supposed to address poverty. And so mapping is a really powerful tool to be able to quantify and qualify this data and really help reduce the gaps and overlaps. And particularly because in the Asia Pacific, we have many beautiful beach destinations, which is why I think we're very attractive to disaster profiteers. And so again, by using this data, we can use a better level of prioritization and also leverage this in terms of what's being approved by the international donors, that we use data and deep community engagement to then be able to identify where infrastructure should be built, whether this political road should be built versus a local road for communities. And I mean, that's probably the biggest strength of the mapping, is that also because it's free and open source, that the data lives on and is not, it doesn't disappear once the next administration comes in.
Thanks so much, Selena. And I guess if I could just add to this, I think taking a localization approach is going to be really important in the future. If we're talking about really empowering women in their own communities, whether it's through technology or political engagement to progress the sustaining peace agenda, in looking at the intersection between what is happening in the climate crisis, COVID, what is happening in terms of development as well. So I think that is also where, in terms of the future, we should potentially also be looking at how do resources, once again, one of the earlier points, get to women on the ground to be able to determine not just that project activity, as you said, Selena, 2 workshops does not result in a resolution, but actually thinking about the sustainability of a response and starting to bring young women into this process. So I quickly just wanted to ask Joan, because we talk about processes of decision making, and maybe even Maria, if there was anything from your research. Particularly, I mean, I find in our Pacific Island communities, for example, we're not just dealing with political governance structures, but also traditional and indigenous governance structures where women, and particularly young women, have to be able to be supported to influence that power of decision making, as well as dealing with government officials. So Joan, have you developed strategies to be able to navigate and influence traditional and indigenous leaders, based on your earlier point that indigenous women, traditional women leaders also have knowledge for the future in terms of climate adaptation recommendations? And Maria, did you find anything like this in your research? Thank you.
Thanks for that very interesting point. Yes, and first of all, we need to acknowledge that in a lot of indigenous societies, patriarchal decision-making system exists. And thereby it's important for women themselves, the indigenous women, to realize that they need to participate in decision making, and thereby ask for that space to be given to them in traditional systems. And we did actually a lot of strategies around this in different communities in the Philippines, in Thailand, in India, and in Nepal, where women started talking to the elders, the men elders, to present their issues, and not in a confrontational way, but in a way that men understand that if they do this, then the community will benefit. So that was the approach done by women to raise that their perspectives are important also for the decision making, and that their participation in those spaces are critical. And in these efforts that we've done, we purposely included young women, young indigenous women, to raise these issues. And the approach they did is starting with their families, starting with their fathers and their grandfathers, raising questions to them about how women can also participate. And for example, the tradition that land inheritance, for example, goes only to men. So they've started raising these questions, and then they raise that it's actually women that are working more on the land. Men tend to leave because they can find jobs somewhere else, but not women. And so land, if land is given to women, it's better protected than to men in terms of the inheritance. And one of the leaders, the woman, her father was a tribal leader, and he then decided to for his daughter to inherit the land, to show as an example that this can be done, and that set a good precedent for other tribal areas to follow, that they can break from these traditions if they see that it actually benefits not only the women but the whole community. So that's how we've done that. But I also want to quickly respond to the question on the enabling environment, on the nexus of capitalism and militarism. I think there are key areas for enabling environment. One is we need policy change. And that policy change should address the distribution of wealth and resources, including to women. That has to be addressed through the right policies that should prioritize the protection of the environment over the greed of business and corporations, and that these measures to protect the environment has a strong mechanisms of enforcing it. So, for example, the concept of polluters pay should be strengthened as a matter of policy. And then also we need strong accountability mechanisms. We know who caused climate change, and they still continue. And why are we allowing them to continue? Why are we allowing mining not only to pollute but destroy communities, increase violence against women? So if there are no accountability, then they can just continue to destroy the earth. And so strong accountability mechanisms are needed. We also need to strengthen democratic participation of citizens in decision making, in budgeting. Because if citizens are not involved in these decisions, then their interest will not be taken into account. It's still the interest of the political elites, the corporations that will prevail. So these are what we need to put in place for an enabling environment, because this will also allow citizens, social movements, because they have the space to participate in decision making, and including, of course, women, and finally, to also make sure that there are strong gender policies, right? Not just respecting the rights of women, but ensuring that there are equitable representation of women in decision-making bodies. So that's the one I want to add in that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan. Maria, a quick response from you as we get closer to the end of our time together.
Thank you. I think I wholeheartedly agree with everything Joan said. I think for my research, I'm also looking more and more into the power of women's networks, and these networks across very different levels. And I think when you're thinking about really challenging, recalcitrant, deeply rooted patriarchal systems and how they are constantly reproduced in everyday lives, there's strength in numbers, right? And these networks allow women to also leverage and move collectively and articulate their needs collectively. And I think moving forward, we need to pay attention and support and acknowledge these different forms of leadership and networks that are emerging, not just at the very granular community level, but there's also regional networks, and Asia-Pacific has many of these, and how they organize at the global level as well to create change. So that I'll end there, but it was a pleasure, and thank you so much to Pacific Forum and Indo-PACOM for organizing this event.
Thank you, Joan, Laura, Selena, and Maria, for your contributions today. You know, we started our conversation by being reminded of that the alarm bells on climate change are deafening. But as we've heard today, so are the alarm bells ringing when it comes to women's access to power and decision making, and bringing together that wisdom, that knowledge from our local communities, from our women-led innovation of technology, to be able to achieve inclusive climate security, action, and adaptation. I think the conversation also is that, you know, we're striving for climate justice, and we need to do that by ensuring that accountability to the myriad of human rights treaties, women's rights commitments, the WPS commitments, including UNSCR 2242, the WPS and Humanitarian Action Compact are realized. We need to see a shift in power and decision when it comes to, and particularly when it comes to resources and financing. Financing is women's business, and it must be driven by what resources women need from the local level to determine, you know, global financing, national, regional financing as well. And that there is a very important need to ensure that we are accountable to women's appropriate and access to appropriate technology, appropriate and accessible, because we can't lose sight of the fact that as women, we're not just talking about an able-bodied scenario, we're talking about disability inclusive, we're talking about multiple languages as well in many of our local communities. And so it's vital that when we talk about information communications platforms, they are indeed accessible, but they also are accessible in the context of language. And this is another opportunity for local women to drive the agenda around infrastructure that often impedes our access to services, but also power and decision making. So finally, I think, you know, once again, through these opportunities to bring different thoughts, different practice, different actions together, we clearly have a message that with gender equality and the women's rights agenda, with the WPS commitments, we have the opportunity to drive the sustaining peace agenda to ensure that women's local knowledge are also supporting the prevention of local crises and conflicts around access to food, issues to do with relocation, the issues that Indigenous communities are also facing in the context of their lives, their culture, their identity, and last but not least, that the WPS agenda clearly has a role to play. But it's not just about taking WPS and putting it into a policy document, but ensuring that women are driving the peace and security agenda, that we are collectively identifying and driving what peace and security means to us in our communities, in our regions, and of course, globally. With that, I want to thank everybody for this opportunity and
No sound.
Rob, you muted, Rob.
Okay.
Dr. David
Rob.
Santoro,
Rob, you muted.
who will introduce Dr. John Wood for the closing session remarks.
Rob, I saw that you talked, but you were muted. I didn't hear what you said.
David, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Aloha, everyone. My name is David Santoro, and I'm president of Pacific Forum. I want to first apologize for background noise that you may hear. I'm actually sitting on my lanai. There's noise outside on the street because there's construction, and someone is making noise above my head in my apartment. So I want to apologize if you hear that noise. Hopefully you'll hear me. But I would like to offer my thanks to all of you who have made this conference such a wonderful experience and success, to the excellent panelists and moderators, to the chairs, and to many staff involved from both the US Pacific Command and Pacific Forum. And of course, many thanks to our audience members for their thought-provoking questions and active engagement. We hope you all found the discussions insightful and inspiring, and we look forward to engaging you at another event very soon. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. John Wood, who will provide the closing remarks for this conference. Dr. Wood is Director of J9 Indo-Pacific Outreach at the US Indo-Pacific Command. He leads the command's strategic public-private partnership outreach and outreach to non-traditional security entities such as academia, think tanks, NGOs, and the private sector, and legislative affairs outreach to US Congress and the Hawaii state government, among many additional leadership responsibilities. Prior to his 2014 appointment to the senior executive service, Dr. Wood was an active duty naval officer and F-14 Tomcat fighter pilot. He's received numerous honors, including being selected as a White House Fellow and serving as Special Assistant to the Secretary of State. Dr. Wood holds a PhD in International Relations from the Fletcher School, Masters of Arts from the University of San Diego, and also the United States Naval War College, as well as a Bachelor of Science from the US Naval Academy. And even more importantly, Dr. Wood is a good friend of Pacific Forum. And so with that, over to you, Dr. Wood.
Thank you, David. It's always a privilege to work with Pacific Forum. Aloha, everybody. I'm coming to you from Kaneohe, which is just over the hill from Waikiki, where you are. And I wish I could be there with you for the close and for the conference there in person, and maybe have lunch with my old friend Amanda Ellis and General Verusalam if she's there also. It is my distinct privilege to be here and provide closing thoughts to advancing women, peace, and security across the region. These past 2 days have been really fantastic. we're privileged to have such a distinguished group of practitioners and scholars join us, and all of your very diverse perspectives and contributions to this dialogue have been tremendous. As our Deputy Commander, Lieutenant General Sklenka said yesterday, he underscored in his opening remarks, we have a lot to learn from these panels and from you, and thank all of you for taking the time for these kinds of breakthrough conversations that generate new insights into how we can improve security for us all. Thank you to the Pacific Forum. I am a great fan of the Pacific Forum for partnering with us on this important and always timely topic, and for your collaboration with us so closely this past years on many WPS and PACOM initiatives. Your team are rock stars, David. And thank you for my Office of Women, Peace and Security for your innovation, willingness to collaborate, and full transparency, and for being a model program for the U.S. Department of Defense. The 4 women who run that program just really rock. So thank you. Next month, we'll make the 21st anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. What a long way we have come, and what a long way we have to go to achieve its goals. Although it's taking time to catch up, the defense sector is recognizing women, peace, and security as an inclusive security approach that factors in the different needs and perspectives of an entire population, men, women, boys, girls, and gender minorities. And our Office of Women, Peace, and Security is working towards aligning gender security principles to our unique mission sets in the Indo-Pacific, including education and training our own personnel. In fact, we start with our own personnel first. But what does that really mean? This starts with critically examining who our security processes, programming, and decisions truly benefit, who in the population has access to resources, who holds formal and informal power, who is missing from the table. And I think that last one is most important, who is missing. This has required a needed fundamental shift in the military way of thinking. It also means we look internally and ask critical questions of ourselves, as addressed in our first session yesterday. Am I an ally for women, peace, and security? Does my organization promote an inclusive environment? How can I contribute to the overall goals of women, peace, and security? While the international WPS agenda provides us with institutional processes for meaningful inclusion and change, it also celebrates something often overlooked: women's role in security and peace every single day. WPS promotes the agency and multifaceted contributions women already make to the security day in and day out, whether in visible leadership roles or not, whether serving as a military member or as a government worker, a scholar, or a civil society practitioner. It is truly smart power we have overlooked and failed to meaningfully include, and a smart power that we desperately need. And it is smart power that authoritarian governments just cannot wield. As we have heard over the course of these last 2 days, global security threats are increasingly interconnected, and threats of climate change, environmental degradation, economic security, transnational threats, and geopolitics have a single common thread, which is gender. Women need to have a direct and active role in every aspect of resolving these security challenges. But it makes sense. It makes just sense. Meaningful inclusion of women and other perspectives provide us with access to previously untapped resources, innovation, and leadership. As part of the defense sector, it is imperative that both men and women in the military effectively communicate how and why WPS is just not relevant, but critical to almost everything we do in the defense sector. That is also the power of a gender perspective. Everybody can have it. But it's incumbent upon all of us to learn and apply it, even if we truly want to achieve a sustainable security and peace. And we really can't do this alone. Advancing WPS requires the investment, commitment, and resourcing from all of us across all sectors of the global society. And that's why we're here today, to learn from each other and expand on our own understanding and application of women, peace, and security. Thank you all for attending and participating in this truly transformative conference. We couldn't do this without the unique and diverse experiences and expertise with our partners here today. With that, the conference is now coming to a close. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Be safe, be well, take care, or as we say here in Hawaii, malama pona. And I think that's the close, unless David, you have anything further to say.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. No, I don't have anything to say. I think you've wrapped it up really well. Thank you so much again. Really appreciate the partnership and how the conference went.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wood, for those important and compelling remarks to bring this Advancing WPS in the Indo-Pacific Conference to a close.